Guys, it is Thursday, July 21st. Welcome to the block. I'm here today with my co-host, Blake Brockermeyer, and our special guest today, Bud Elliott. Bud, now when it comes to betting on games, a lot of people need an education on it. A lot of people don't really understand when they see the numbers. What are some of the best bets we have this year for the 2022 season?
Yeah, guys, I'm happy to be on the block. I watch it all the time on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, and I'm happy to be here from ACC Media Day in the hotel room. So I've been looking here, and I try to get some with the flavor that I've been at, right? SEC Media Day, ACC Media Day. I've been to both this week, and I've actually got four for us this week, and I like these for various reasons. So I went ahead and played Virginia under 7.5 wins. A lot of people are high on Virginia because they do return quarterback Brennan Armstrong, and the schedule is pretty soft, but I don't know if people know this. They lost all 5 offensive linemen, either to graduation or to the portal, and they took a kid from Georgetown who was a very highly rated, or at least highly thought of transfer to start. He actually transferred back to Georgetown for personal reasons. I'm not trying to imply anything. I just literally don't know why, but I do know they needed that kid, and it's not easy to get transfers to Virginia due to the academics. So I don't love the fact that they lost all 5 linemen and the transfer they were counting on ain't going to be there. So under 7.5 for Virginia. They could lose a game like Georgia Tech or, a Duke. They could lose to Va Tech. They could lose maybe one of the non-conference games. Similarly, this is a decent price to pay, minus 190. So you're having to plop down 190 to net 100. But I don't see Syracuse making a bowl game. Now they have the new coaching staff on offense from Virginia, and I like Dino Babers a lot. I'm usually a believer. Their offensive line is pretty thin again, which I don't love entering the season. They are also going from something that was very run heavy now to try and run something similar to what UVA ran last year. And they actually were kind of lucky with some turnovers last year. I don't know if that's going to last. They could threaten a bowl. I could be wrong about this, but I have them more in that like 4.8 wins. So for me, under 5.5 is some value. Switching over to the SEC, I went ahead and popped LSU over 6. Now LSU on my spreadsheet, they could go like 4-8. They could go 10-2. So there's a pretty wide error bar. But one thing I think will be consistent with them is that defensive line is going to mess some people up. They have a bunch of dudes there who will play on Sundays, and I know they have playmakers at receiver. I think it actually might be Miles Brennan as the starter, which is interesting because a lot of people are thinking, will it be Nussmeier? Will it be Davis? Brian Kelly historically has not rolled the dice and gone with the young talent. He's typically gone with the guy he thinks he can trust, the more veteran. And they do open with FSU in the Dome, so you may want a guy that just you think won't lose you the game potentially. I think LSU can win 7, maybe 8 games this year. And then I went ahead and took Auburn under 6.5. I think Auburn can go to a bowl potentially, but I think they have one of the worst quarterback situations in the SEC, and they lost a lot of guys at receiver. D-line's still strong. I think the secondary is okay, but they lost some important guys back there too. The schedule's tough. They do draw Penn State. So those 4 are the 4 I have for us today picked out, and I feel good about these.
Yeah, I looked through those, Bud. I love the Virginia under 7.5. I'm with you. Brennan Armstrong is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in college football. I cannot believe he didn't transfer. I mean, with all the losses that they accumulated over the offseason, I figured he was a guy that could easily leave, but hats off for him for staying and sucking it up. And I think that to me is the best bet. I think Auburn is the next best bet. I look at Auburn's schedule and could see them. I think best case scenario for them is 5-7. They're starting at the Penn State game, going down the rest of their schedule. They've got maybe one game. I think they play like Western Kentucky, I believe, right before Alabama. Like that's the only basically guaranteed win that they have. So I think Brian Harsin's in for a long year. They've got some playmakers scattered amongst their roster, but I'm with you. I don't see that happening for them. And then Syracuse, here's me. I'm with you. I don't know. Their schedule actually sets up nicely for them in the SEC this year. I bet you Brian Kelly wishes he could have that schedule next year instead of this year, because I think they'll be a lot better next year. But I like their D-line as well. Keyshawn Boutte is one of the top receivers in the country. They got some playmakers. That's one that I would be a little bit leery about. But just curious, when you go through your analytics and you decide on who to play and just how does your system work, and what's your typical bet for you, Bud, compared to like if these are your 4 favorite bets, let's say, do you bet more on these, or do you just keep them all the same?
Yeah. So it starts with creating a power number, right? And generally how I do it is I look at what I had last year, and then I look at coaching changes and roster attrition and roster addition. And then you basically go and you take the schedule, you plug the power numbers in, and that gives you a spread. You convert the spread to a win probability, and then you add up all those win probabilities. And, if you got 10 games at 70%, that's 7.0, right? That's going to be 7 wins. So look at that, and then I compare that to the numbers that Vegas has. Obviously, we support Caesars here at 24/7, but I will say it is very important to shop around always on these, because you'll see, for instance, some places have Virginia 6.5. I'm not going to bet Virginia under 6.5 if I can bet them under 7.5. That one win might not seem like a lot, but one win is a heck of a big deal. So I converted to that. I would caution people, try not to bet too many things that are related. So I do like both the LSU and the Auburn bet, but they play each other. So if Auburn beats LSU, I could be in trouble on both. So I try not to play too many of those that are too related. Like I like Louisville over a little bit, but they play Cuse to open the year. I'm probably not going to. So you got to be cautious of things that are like implicitly double and triple betting the same thing, because they're all related. So just pick the best ones generally.
Does the juice ever scare you away on a bet, or vice versa? Does it ever give you clues on, yeah, I like this bet more because it's minus 190, or is there a certain number that triggers you to thinking, yeah, this is actually, I like this more?
Yeah, I always say bet numbers, not teams, right? You can fall in love with the laundry, but the laundry's not giving you the value. It's what the number is. And so, you need to figure out, like, hey, is it really worth paying 190 on Cuse? Well, in my estimation, yeah, some other sites or some other casinos had Cuse at 4.5. So I was willing to go and pay the minus 190 on Syracuse. 4.5. I like that a lot less. Dino's teams typically play really hard. There's not a lot of quitting them. And I think he's a good coach. It's just, that's a really hard place to win now.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the price is very important.
Gotcha.
So, Bud, give me your dark horse candidate for the Heisman. Who's a guy that you think can win the Heisman? That'll be a good bet for people, a real dark horse candidate.
So I don't have a whole lot of Heisman stuff this year. And that's not because I don't like betting the Heisman. I do, and sometimes I've done well with it. But I think this is a pretty stacked, top heavy field this year. I mean, think about it. Generally, quarterbacks are going to be who you want to bet on, and it's going to be quarterbacks who are leading their team to the playoff. If it's a bad quarterback year, sometimes a running back can sneak in there. I'd like to see a defensive player win it sometime, but it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But when you have the returning Heisman winner in Bryce, and you have CJ Stroud, who is almost certainly going to put up just insane numbers, if those guys stay healthy, a large percentage of the votes are just going to go to those two. And I'm not anxious to put my money down for 6 months to just get 2 or 3x back on it when it's not necessarily a lock. If you wanted something that could just be statistically nuts, there's some like Quinn Ewers 30-1 out there. And again, I don't think Quinn Ewers is going to win Heisman. I'm just trying to think like what could hit and be a nice payday. And you could weave a tale that Texas clicks. Maybe the defense doesn't click all that much, so they have to throw all the time. We know Sark's offense typically scores a lot of points. Maybe they win the Big 12. I don't think they're going to make the playoff or anything like that, but maybe they win the Big 12. Ewers throws it all over the yard, and 30-1 hits. But I think this is a pretty top heavy year this year, guys. Like there's not an obvious real dark horse to me.
Yeah, it seems to me.
Do you think that Will Anderson could be a good bet, Blake? I know we talked a little bit about this the other day off camera. Could Will Anderson be a good heavy bet for people?
I hope so. I've got a lot of money on him winning the Heisman. I just think 25-1, he's a great dark horse candidate. It's unlikely that a defensive player wins it. especially with Alabama and Ohio State's firepower they have on offense. My money is on either an Ohio State player or an Alabama player is going to win the Heisman this year. It could be, 3 guys on each team, maybe more. But I think if there's a lot of mouths to feed on those 2 teams, I think if Will Anderson does what he did last year and even improves on it, and let's say, Henderson and Gibbs at Alabama are running for a lot of yards and taking away a lot of the passing yards by Stroud and Bryce Young, I think, there's a chance. I don't think it's a great chance, but I'm going to put some of my own money on it just because of what a dominant player he is defensively.
Now, Bud, what is the biggest sucker bet this year?
Biggest sucker bet. Ooh, okay. I saw some like Alabama to make the playoff at like -300, and I would rather just play them to win the SEC if I had to. I'd rather just play them to win the SEC at -145. This is where, to get back to Blake's question about does price matter? It absolutely matters. You need to figure out what's more value. Now, granted, could Bama make the playoff without winning the SEC? Yes, and indeed they have in prior years, right? The hell, they won the whole thing one year without winning their own conference. But there's a difference between being pretty sure that like Bama or Ohio State are going to win the title and thinking there's actually value on it. Because you know who else thinks that? Me and every other guy out there with a spreadsheet, and probably the guy behind the counter who's setting the numbers that we're betting. Like everybody's pretty sure that those guys are going to be the Heisman. So I was, or the national title. I would say there's not a whole lot of value on taking those favorites like that.
Yeah, I feel like Bama and Ohio State, picking them to win a natty, you're not going to get a lot of value from them. And then again, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud to win the Heisman. It's like the odds aren't like the odds are too good that they'll win it. So you're not going to get a lot of investment back on. I think you got to dig a little bit deeper. I'd rather take Travion Henderson as a running back than I would CJ Stroud, just because of the value you're going to get.
Now, I got a question for Blake. Can I ask Blake a question? I know I'm not the host.
Yeah.
Can Will Anderson win the Heisman if Bryce Young stays healthy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Bryce Young threw for a lot of yards last year. I don't think Alabama's DNA this year is going to be to throw the ball as much as they had last year. I think that they've got a nice stable of running backs. I think they can help their offensive line out by maybe calling a little bit more of a balanced game. I mean, you watch Ohio State's offense, and they do a really great job of keeping the offensive line gives them a chance to succeed. They've got good players, but you can't just throw the ball every play like Alabama did and expect to have a dominant offensive line. So I think so. I think, like I said, both of those teams are loaded offensively. And I think if Will Anderson just being snubbed last year, I think is going to help him, one. And I think if he can get off to a big start, I mean, he's going to do what he does. Alabama's defense is going to be even better this year. So he's probably going to be, statistically, he could even be better, which is hard to imagine. I think they have a really weak home schedule. They play a few teams at home that I can't imagine he's going to play a whole lot in. So I don't know if those stats will be, as crazy as they could be. But if he shines in the big games in the national spotlight and makes a big impact, then I think, heck yeah, he's got a chance. Not a great chance, but a chance.
Now, Bud, you're out in Charlotte right now at the ACC Media Days. What are some of the things in the ACC that we aren't talking about?
So there are, I think, 8 or 9 new offensive coordinators in this league, and almost as many new defensive coordinators. So like Boston College, Cignetti is now at Pitt, and part of the new coordinators come from just head coaching changes as well. Mario has 2 new guys at Miami. I think Miami will be a much slower paced team this year. If you guys are watching this for the betting content, I think that's important to remember because, hey, how many possessions you have really matters a whole lot for over-unders, and I asked Tyler Van Dyke today, like, hey, who do you think is going to step up to replace Charleston Rambo and Mike Harley, who accounted for more than 200 targets last year, which is just a tremendous amount in a college football season. And he said, well, maybe Keyshawn Smith, and we're still kind of waiting to find out. And then he's talking about how they're being deliberate at practice. And all in my head, I'm like, oh, man, this is Mario. They're going to try to run the ball a whole lot. Last year, they were very fast. Like, I'm going to have to adjust my numbers down to account for, 4 or 5 fewer points total per game. Not because their offense will be worse, but just because they're going to play much slower, I think. I had a good conversation with Jeff Hafley, the coach at Boston College. He was a DB coach in the NFL. And I don't know if you guys have talked about this yet, but there's 2 important rule changes coming to college football. So now defensive holding is an automatic first down. And also receivers or anybody outside the tackle box cannot cut, even if it's head up. So Hafley was telling me when he was a DB coach with, I think, the Niners, right? He thought he was going to get fired because in the preseason, remember a couple of years ago when they emphasized defensive holding, or it was just flags all the time. It's like we had like 12 penalties, just defensive holding in one preseason game. I thought I was going to get fired. So he's wondering, like, will this be a point of emphasis for the refs early on? And if so, it could have a flag fest to start the year. I would say those things. And then DJ Uyunglele said that he was a little too heavy after the Cheez-It Bowl last year. And I was like, hey, I've been there for sure. That Cheez-It Bowl is kind of dangerous, but he said he's lost 30 pounds and he does look slimmer. And if he doesn't play, is it Cade Klubnik? Those are a couple things I'm watching from the league.
Yeah, I think everyone's watching the Clemson quarterback situation. I mean, just watching them in the spring, DJU had lost weight and all that. It didn't look any better to me in the spring than he did during the season last year, which is weird to me because as a freshman, he looked pretty good. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes with Clemson. I like Dabo defending him and really putting it out there. I mean, I don't know what's he supposed to do? Say he's terrible and not going to play. I mean, but you got to give him credit for sticking up for his guy, unlike Pittsburgh's coach Narduzzi throwing his OC Mark Whipple under the bus yesterday. I thought that was interesting. I can't imagine Narduzzi's going to get a lot of rising coaches wanting to work for him after doing that. So those are some of the things that I thought were interesting about ACC Media Days.
He's had a tough offseason. Like Jordan Addison left for USC. They lose Whipple. I like Pitt's roster this year. I really do. I mean, they got 10 of 11 back on defense. I trust Pat Narduzzi fully to have a nasty defense if he's got that experience of a secondary and a defensive front that, pretty much eats people up. I'm just worried that he's going to must-champ it, right? And by must-champ it, you guys know what I mean. Just like pretend that the only goal of the offense is to not throw interceptions and just let the defense win it. And just that creates too many close games, and you're not going to win all of your one-score games. That brings luck and variance into play. So I want Narduzzi to be like, let's score 30. I don't want to see a whole lot of 20 to 14 games out of Pitt, because if he can get 30, I'm all about Pitt for the Coastal possible.
Yeah, and they got their whole offensive line back. I mean, they should be pretty good. I mean, on paper, they look like one of the top teams. I mean, everyone's talking about Pitt, Miami, Clemson, NC State as the 4 teams to kind of run the ACC this year. I look at Wake and I look at Louisville as some kind of dark horse guy. No one's talking about Wake, and kind of they had a great year last year offensively. Defensively, they weren't great. But who are we missing in the ACC that we're not talking about enough? That maybe is flying under the radar that you would throw a couple of bucks on to win the ACC that aren't the 4 teams that everyone's talking about.
Yeah, so Pitt was definitely the one, although I guess if we're including them with the 4, and I think they probably should now be included in the 4. Early in the offseason, there were some nice prices on Pitt to win the ACC. I'm not fully convinced that North Carolina takes a big step back. They did lose Sam Howell, but they've recruited pretty well. If Mac's been developing those guys, they could. I don't think they're gonna fall off as much as some people think just because they lost Sam Howell. And I agree with you on Louisville. I do know that a lot of other staffs wanted Jermaine Lola, the nose guard they got out of Arizona State, the transfer. And Louisville has badly needed a nose in that defense. That's been one of their worst positions in recent years. Those 2 make sense to me. Wake scares me as far as like further upside. I had him as extremely lucky last year, turnover wise. They do run that funky system, so I think it's hard to figure out with that mesh point that extends forever. It looks like they're practicing dancing like on the field, but Wake is weird because they lost two guys last year in the preseason who were important players, receiver Donovan Green and then left tackle Javonte Nash, and both those dudes are back. So I'm having a hard time figuring Wake out, but it's hard to doubt Dave Clawson.
Yeah, I think everyone is. I mean, Wake's a team I watched last year that's got some players that I don't think a lot of people know about, but no one's talking about them. So it'll be interesting to see how they do this year. And in the future ACC scheduling model, they got a great, I guess, what is it? 3 teams that there are 3 regular teams that they play. They got a great schedule that sets up nicely for them to have a lot of success.
Yeah, it really does.
And guys, as we're talking about these teams, I really think it was an ugly move for Pat Narduzzi to take a shot at Mark Whipple. You have a historic season last year. They were really off the charts offensively. It was a head scratcher to me that Whipple wanted that bad to leave Pitt to go to Nebraska, who's been failing. Then he lost Brendan Marion as a receiver coach. And I can't help but think that if Whipple and Marion are still there, does Jordan Addison stay at Pitt? And so I always think it's a poor choice when a coach calls out a former coach the way he did, especially with the success that they had offensively a year ago that produced a first-round quarterback and a really historic season for Pitt.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you Carl, you both you guys have coached. Like that doesn't necessarily inspire you to want to go coach for that guy, especially like if I'm the OC and we had the best offense in 30 years at Pitt, I'd be like, hey, scoreboard, that game you're complaining about, we dropped 45 and had 500 yards of offense. What more do you want?
Yeah, it makes no sense to me.
Let's go down to Miami for a second. Mario Cristobal getting rid of the turnover chain for the Miami Hurricanes. Give me your thoughts on that. Me personally, guys, I never liked the turnover chain. I hated it. High school kids wanted to do it after they saw Miami doing it. I'm kind of glad that he got rid of it. But what's your take on the situation with the turnover chain in Miami?
So, Cristobal is off that Nick Saban coaching tree, and Georgia has the spike shoulder pads. Bama's got the belt. So I was a little surprised he took it away. I think it's one of those things, though, you got to manage it. You got to read the room and say, okay, if we're down 3 scores, we maybe tell our team photographer, don't go over there and make a big deal out of this kid getting turnover chain when we're down 21. Like, okay, it's fine to celebrate the stuff. I think Mario is very much like, hey, we'll have our fun driving around our Maseratis. We're getting in the NIL scene. And like, when we're here, we're going to work hard and be very businesslike. It was very, very understated today at ACC Media Day from him, not real flashy. And he's talking about like, we're going to be regimented, we're going to be disciplined, and just all those buzzwords. So I think he's trying to send messages to his players like, hey, we need to be more substance than flash. Also, in fairness to Mario, last year they were almost dead last in the nation. I think they were dead last in the Power 5 in tackling. So everybody's trying to strip the ball nonstop, but you do need to get the guy down on the ground at some point too. So,
I think it's just, to me, kids love that kind of stuff. I know when I was at SMU, we did the bottle service and popping bottles, and it was a fun deal on the sideline. But I think Mario wants to wipe his hands clean of everything in the past in the last few staffs of Miami. I think he wants to put his stamp on the way that he wants to do things. And I'm, maybe down the road they'll come up with something that's kind of his deal. But I think it's going to be all business at Miami for a few years until they turn this thing around, which it looks like they're heading that way.
Guys, let's get into Florida State a little bit and take a look at Tallahassee. Now, Bud, my guy here, Blake, said the other day on the show that Florida State is not going to make a bowl game. Like that was like his bowl prediction. Tell me how you feel about that.
I don't think it's that bold. Okay. Like I wouldn't pick them to miss a bowl game. I think they'll probably go like 7-5. But when you look at this team schedule, you have Florida and LSU in the non-conference. You also play, I think, 9 other games that I project to be a single-digit spread.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, 8 others. So you got about 10 out of your 12 games are going to be extremely close games, at least on paper. Like Clemson will be bigger than that. Everything else very closely projected. Guys, those are the types of schedules where really wild results happen. So I could see Florida State going 4-8. I could see Florida State going 10-2. They just, like, if they stay healthy, the coin flips go their way. Carl, you know what I'm talking about. Like, if you win a whole bunch of close games, all of a sudden you look up like, I don't know if we're really that good, but okay. we keep winning all these field goal contests. Like that's certainly possible, right? And that's something that Mike Norvell and his staff have to try to avoid. You know, I think this team definitely beats last year's team. I think, you know, last year's team beats the first team he had there in 2020, but it's a difficult schedule.
Yeah, I look at their schedule. They got 3 wins that are locks. They got 3 easy wins. After that, like you said, they got a lot of games that are going to be really close. I look at their schedule. I see a 5-7 season like they had last year. You're right, though. They have 1 or 2 things bounce their way. You know, that could turn into a 7-5 season, but I don't see them. You know, I just don't see that. I don't see that happening, but it definitely could.
But if Florida State doesn't make a bowl game, and if they win 3 to 5 games, do the fans start crying for Deion Sanders as the head football coach at Florida State, their famous alum?
I think some fans probably would. I don't know that the decision makers would, right? I think they would probably want to go for somebody like more proven at the Power 5 level. Typically what you see is, like, if you fire one guy, you go the opposite. You just hired an offensive guy, you're going to go to defense, right? You got a guy from the G5 or not the P5. Next time you're going to go back to the P5, right? You had a guy, you know, who was a coordinator. Then you're going to say, oh, no, that didn't work. We're going to need some head coaching experience. That's pretty much, even if it's not the right way to do it, that's pretty much how all college football decision makers do it. You typically don't see like back-to-back non-Power 5 hires if you had to fire one. You know, you typically don't see back-to-back coordinator type hires. But I think some fans are probably clamoring for it, especially since they beat him for Travis Hunter.
Give us a Seminole player that we need to know.
All right, let's go to the defensive tackle spot. Odell Higgins has been putting out D tackles into the league for a long, long time. They got very fortunate to get this transfer from Mississippi State 3 years ago now, Fabien Lovett. He battled through a lot of stuff last year. I know I talked to him yesterday. He has a young son with some major medical issues, and he was like, hey, I'm really blessed to be able to have these NIL opportunities because it allowed me to not have to take a gamble on going to the draft when I really wasn't ready to go to the draft. And we were able to get, you know, some additional help for my son and, you know, allow me to work on my game and have a big senior year. He's definitely a guy, and the ACC is loaded at D tackle. When you look at Clemson and NC State, and Miami's got some kids. He's a dude who could be upper tier ACC, and I think could be, you know, a top 100 type pick. Odell's very excited about him, and that'll be a guy that could give LSU a lot of trouble.
Give us an idea of what do you think happened at Florida State with the Amarius Mims transfer? He went in the portal. It looked like he was going a lock for Florida State. He ends up pulling back out and staying at Georgia, you know, at the last minute. Kind of give us an idea, you know, from your perspective of what went on there.
Remember that ESPN documentary when they have Cam Newton be like, as they say, it's an ongoing investigation. So I think Amarius Mims had a lot of opportunities at all schools, you know, Florida State, Miami, and of course Georgia as well. And then I know that his good friend was killed in a car crash, basically the day before I thought this was going to go public. And word we heard was basically like, hey, that was tragic and impacted him a lot and made him want to, you know, stay with his current teammates. So I think that's kind of the official word on that. It's obviously, you know, really sad to, you know, lose somebody you're that close with. But it's transfer portal. It's crazy, right? Like one school thinks they got a guy locked up, and then all of a sudden, not only did he not transfer, he went back.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to me that, you know, if you know, I've heard reports of kind of the money that was being offered to him potentially. I don't know if it's accurate or not.
Oh, I bet it's at least $500,000. I mean, like per year, because like Zay Flowers told me yesterday at ACC that he turned down $600K for his final year to return to Boston College.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was hearing. But, you know, and then go back to Georgia where you're, you know, right now you're not a starter. I mean, you know, you're going to be a backup again. So it's interesting to me that he would choose that decision to go back. I mean, Georgia's obviously a national championship contender and a place he's familiar with, but Florida State could have gotten paid and, you know, would have been a lock to start there.
Yeah. he may be getting some stuff from Georgia as well. I would hope he is.
Yeah, he got something. I guarantee.
And Georgia's going to lose Broderick Jones to the draft unless Jones gets hurt. I mean, like Broderick Jones is going to be a high pick. So like for if you're UGA, you're removing the uncertainty of what do we do after Jones goes if Mims transfers. Like, oh well, guess what? We're going to slide into Amarius Mims and we're good.
And their right tackle Warren McClendon is a really good player. I think he's very underrated. He's got a lot of experience. So Georgia's pretty good at tackle this year for sure.
They're going to maul some people.
Yeah. Speaking of transfers, let's talk about the NCAA committee. There's reports that they are talking about doing away with the one transfer exception and where they're going to allow kids in good academic standing to transfer basically as many times as they want. But let's get your opinion on that. And is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
All right, so I just sent in my bar dues to renew my license as an attorney here in Florida. So I immediately think this is a legal thing. The NCAA does not want to get dragged into court and beat again, because if you're telling me these guys are not employees, you can't put non-competes on people who are also not employees, right? Like I'm an employee of CBS. They could tell me I can't go work for ESPN. If I was just a contractor, guess what? I could bounce around. So they need to make sure their rules are consistent with what they're saying. They're saying these guys are not employees, they're just students. Well, if a kid who plays the cello in the orchestra wants to transfer to 4 schools in 4 years, he can do it. So I think that's why they did this, right? They don't want to have another court loss over non-competes.
And I think with the 85 scholarship rule now being where guys can you can always fill their spots instead of having to do what Kansas has been doing for the last decade and trying to gray shirt, blue shirt, all that kind of stuff. I think that is going to make it easier for teams to obviously fill their rosters, but you're going to see during that 45-day transfer window or whatever, I think I read it was, you're going to see a lot of guys transfer multiple times if that is allowed to happen, because I think it's just, kids are going to get mad about not, certain situations and go somewhere else. So it'll be interesting to see. You will never know what your team's going to look like anymore going into, in 4 years will look like this. It's going to change now every 6 months.
Oh, Carl, you'll like this. One more thing from ACC Media. I forgot if I can jump in here. So Dave Doran, NC State's coach, he was asked about, recruiting North Carolina locally and all that stuff. And he really took the time to call out the NCAA for, doing kind of the PR move of giving all these kids extra eligibility due to COVID, which I don't think anybody thinks is a bad thing, but then not extending the cap on 85 scholarships to allow you to actually have a roster that can fit those kids. And he's like, and it's not fair to high school kids, and we're not going to be back to high school recruiting until probably that 2025 class. So,
that has been one of the major complaints from high school coaches across the country in terms of with the COVID guys getting to stay extra year. A lot of guys feel like high school guys got screwed. I know, Blake, you've coached high school as well, similar to I have. Now, my take on it is that a lot of the high school guys are now with the transfer portal and with the COVID year, they really are just ending up being evaluated and ending up at the level that they should have been at the beginning. You're not going to see as many guys transferring and dropping down as you had in the past. And so I know that it's a bummer for those guys, but the guys that are in the top 100 to 200 players in the country, they're still going to the SEC. They're still going to the Big Ten. They're still going to the ACC. So I don't think it's hurt the top kids, but I do think that we've had some issues with kids that are more the borderline recruits. Blake, what are your thoughts on it?
I think for sure it is. I've never understood why 85 is the magic number for scholarships. Why not make it 100? I think that they could increase their scholarship limits. They've got all these ridiculous scholarship limits in baseball where you get like 11.7 scholarships or something. Like, just increase it. You can increase it. The Title IX sports, you can increase those as well. So that's what I would do to solve a lot of these issues, is just, increase the number, because that's an easy fix. It's not going to cost the university that much money to do that. And with today's, NIL stage and the way things are going, I don't understand why these top schools or even having walk-ons. Just put your top players, pay them extra, and make them walk-ons. I mean, they don't need a scholarship if they're making $500,000 or more. So that's how I would fix it. If I were a school, I would imagine you'll see more of that coming. But I think that's an easy fix to me. That should be a no-brainer.
This is exactly why, by the way, I think eventually we will see a breaking off of like the top probably 45 to 65 schools, because it is very easy if you are Alabama or pretty much almost anybody in the P5 to say, yeah, like we could go back to, what did we cut down to? Like 92. And then I think we used to have 105 or something like that. But keep in mind, some of these G5 schools, like my buddy coaches at a G5, and he's like, remember the one COVID year where you could go above the 85?
Yeah.
He said, our administration said no on that.
Yeah.
We don't have the budget. Even though the NCAA said you could go above 85, we were not allowed to go 85. And I think a lot of these P5 schools want to have full funding for baseball scholarships as well. So this is sort of one of the things that is being talked about in sport. Why is Arkansas State voting on the same issue that's going to affect, Georgia? Right. They're kind of they're playing the same sport, but they're playing at a different level and with different goals.
I do think that one thing that the NCAA got right, they get beat up a lot when they threw out the 25 per year cap, so guys at least can replenish their roster. Guys, I do think they got that part right, but there is some still needed changes with the transfer portal, with scholarship numbers. There's still plenty of things that need to be addressed to continue to grow the game. Guys, that's going to wrap it up for the block today. Like, subscribe, share, show it to your friends. For my co-host today, Blake Brockermeyer and Bud Elliott, this is the block. We'll see you next time.